to give time to this excellent panel. So welcome to the second part of our special conflict journalism research event. To those just joined, my name is Fergal Quinn. So the first part of this event looked at the experiences of conflict journalists in general. Okay, so Lorcan and the Lorcan and Luke's story. This one focuses on coverage of the recent events in Gaza. So I'll be introducing Heba, Hadi, Hamza, Rouwah and Kathryn properly in a few moments. But firstly, I'm just going to summarise a research project here in UL that drove and framed this event. It's ongoing and led by myself, Dr. Henry Silke, Dr. Maria Rieder here in UL, and colleagues Eileen Cullity in DCU and Eugenia Ciapera in UCD. And our research focuses on the media failures, I suppose, when it comes to covering the events in Gaza. To briefly remind ourselves of what has happened and continues to happen in Gaza, the Israeli military operation there has killed 70,000 Palestinians since 2023. 70,000 people. 80% of those deaths have been civilians, over a third of those children. This has been perpetrated with both overt and tacit support by Western allies. It's one of the worst war crimes in our lifetime. So the question we're trying to engage with, or this research tried to engage with, was how did the media perform in terms of bearing witness to what was going on in Gaza? Did it cut through the misinformation and propaganda? Did it record the human cost of what was happening? Now, despite the efforts of individual reporters, we got a sense of that from Lorcan and Luke there, the history of overall media, Western media coverage of wars in the past is not good. The academic analysis of coverage of previous wars tends to tell a tale of aspirational myth versus of what journalists want to do, to be accurate, to be impartial, to speak truth to power, of the universal value of human life, versus the reality of a media which is geopolitically aligned, detached ethically, and only cares about the perfect victims. So we wanted to see how this played out in Gaza in general, and in the coverage of attacks, specifically in the coverage of attacks on Palestinian journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists, an extremely careful and reputable source, has recorded 259 journalists killed and 174 injured, 106 imprisoned. That's over 500 journalists taken out either permanently or in terms of being able to cover what was happening during the war in Gaza. This compares to 17 journalists killed throughout the war in Ukraine so far. So it's extraordinary numbers. We looked at reporting on the Palestinian journalism deaths in the Western media between October 2023 to August 2025 in 4 major US and 10 UK outlets. So we looked at the frequency and focus of articles which covered journalists being killed, whether articles mentioned international law or potential war crimes, whether the killings are condemned by politicians, whether journalists killed were delegitimized or smeared. Again, for context on this, to get a sense of what a big deal the targeting of journalists usually is, just cast your minds back to the attacks on Charlie Hebdo magazine in 2015 in Paris. 12 journalists were killed in that horrible event by Islamist militants. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks. And this translated very quickly into more than 40 political leaders leading a massive march for press freedom in Paris. We see the French and German presidents, the Polish president, and that great defender of press freedom, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, there on the left. So, given the scale of the response to 12 dead media workers in Paris, did our analysis find a similar reaction to the killing of almost 300 journalists in Gaza? The short answer is no. In almost 2 years covering the war in the US, just 122 articles featured the murder of journalists prominently in the 4 outlets looked at. In the UK, it was 292 across 10 outlets. In the US, and again, the red line is the number, the accumulation of journalists being killed. The purple line is the accumulation of coverage. So more journalists being killed than there were even articles noting the deaths. So just a visualization that shows that. Lots of other disturbing tendencies as we burrow down into it. So during a conflict, the media is always a forum for narratives and counter-narratives from different sides. Good journalism interrogates these, provides context and communicates as close to the truth as possible. And it's very difficult to do that in a conflict scenario. In this instance, less than a fifth of the articles looked at in the US and the UK reminded the reader that journalists are not legitimate military targets. Okay, just a very basic thing, you know, just a little bit of context here. Journalists are not legitimate military targets in any possible sense. These were of the very small number of articles that covered the deaths of journalists. The overwhelming verifiable evidence that journalists were being targeted by Israel was present in just 44% of the UK articles and 28% of the US ones, again, of that tiny amount that even covered the story in any way, shape or form. So what about the counter-narrative that justified or excused the deaths? The Israeli line that 292 deaths were mistakes. Oops, we meant to do something else, but we just happened to kill a journalist. That made it into 42% of US articles and 32%. So the excuse or the justification, i.e. that it was that it was a mistake, even worse, almost a third of the US articles and a fifth of the UK ones examined included smears from Israeli sources that the dead journalists were terrorists. Remember all the Western politicians lining up to condemn the Charlie Hebdo attacks? Just 3% of the articles we looked at and 6% of the UK ones included political condemnation of any sort. So our study raises the question, I suppose, that if the Western media can make so weak a case for targeting of their own colleagues, then what does that say about their ability to cover anything else in Gaza? So that's the context. That's the significant silence. That's to almost a degree of collusion, I suppose, and that's a big word. And here are the people on stage that can tell us about the lived reality of this as journalists. And I'm delighted to have them here today. So we have Hamza Ibrahim on the left here. Hamza worked as a Palestinian journalist in Gaza, where he has contributed to We Are Not Numbers and Al Jazeera before fleeing Gaza to come to Ireland this year. And he's currently doing an MA in journalism here in the University of Limerick. Heba, Almaqadma, worked as a journalist in Gaza, where she contributed to articles like Drop Site, Palestine Nexus and others. She fled Gaza last year to come to Ireland, where she's doing an MA in global media in NUIG Galway. Heba's brother, Hadi Almaqadma, again works as a journalist in Gaza and is currently studying the same course in NUIG Galway, and his work has been published in Palestine Nexus, and other outlets. We also have Dr. Kathryn Hayes, who's part of the journalism department here in the University of Limerick and specialises in precarity and journalism and digital labour. And also Dr. Rouwah Bseiso, a lecturer in global media and journalism at the University of Galway, specialising in Arab regional media, political communications and decolonial studies. So just want to welcome you all here today. And I suppose I just wanted to, first of all, and we'll start with Heba, if you don't mind. Can you just tell me, just briefly, of your own personal story? And I suppose you and Hadi, you share a story a little bit. So just your own personal story before coming to Ireland.
Actually, so the first few days of the genocide, my family and I have survived a bomb, where after that we stayed for a month in Al-Shifa hospital. Hadi and I were okay, thankfully, but the rest of my family, some of them were injured like badly, to the point that they had to be treated outside of Gaza and get evacuated to Qatar. So after that, we have got displaced from the north to the south and so on. And the first, I've been interested in writing before the genocide. I was writing even an article about Rachel Corrie I'm not gonna get to details about who she is right now. So, but I didn't publish it, and after that I wrote my personal story about surviving that bomb, and I published it with Palestine Nexus. And I believe I only wrote it because I felt like I need to document what happened to me in order to get over it, maybe, or like process what I've been through. And after that, I found myself like more interested about journalism, especially that my father is a journalist. And he has always, to be honest, found journalism like a dangerous career in Gaza. And I still recall that when I graduated high school, I was considering journalism as one of my options to go for. And he said, like, as my advice, no, it's a dangerous career in Gaza, so I chose something else. But then with everything going on, I found myself like I've been through a bomb, even though I didn't do anything, I didn't write, I didn't publish, so why not? I'm gonna start doing it right now. And after publishing a few articles, lately the last one was with Dropsite about the starvation, I applied for journalism in NUIG, and I got evacuated to Ireland.
Hamza, again, thank you for that, Heba. So all you guys, like, you're quite young. You're to some degree, you were the people who stepped up to broadcast what was happening in Gaza when a lot of the professional journalism corps in Gaza were wiped out, essentially. Hamza, tell me a little about your the first piece of journalism, and it was a video that you showed me recently. It was one of the first days of the bombing of Gaza. Just talk to me about that. And you just started recording. It's a very striking video. I really should be showing it today, but just talk to me about that.
Because first of all, I was an English teacher, and I becoming a journalist, and my got interesting in journalism because I need to tell a story behind lines. I need to say dreams that no one can hear. So I went with horrible times, with sleepless days that I hear everyday bombings, and as a journalist, I captures the death. Even I think that maybe next time I'll be the next. So and I start to make a short video recording with a simple things like my phone. Even if there's no internet, no electricity, it's so hard to get internet. So I decide to go from area to area just to upload one video, or to just, get a spotty internet. So the first video I captured when there was a massacre that happened in the Shifa hospital. It was in October, the first time for, and I captured with my phone. It's so hard because with someone see all the death, see all these bodies lying down in the earth, and it's because it's my first time I see like this sense, and I start to capture it with my phone. And it took me a couple of days just to get internet, and I can upload this video. And being a journalist is so hard because you just imagine that you capture the death in front of you, and you never imagined that, or you couldn't imagine that you'll be the next. And I was really afraid for my family. So because I wanted to be alive on Al Jazeera, making like interviews with Al Jazeera channel, and my mom used to say to me, please just keep away, like just don't be like alive on something like Al Jazeera or something, because we're afraid, because we need to be in a safe, like even if there is no safety, there is no food, there is no water in Gaza, it's so hard to just capturing as simple things that I need to let the world know, because as the world at the first time before was sleeping, and they didn't really care about those stuffs, because I mean when the journalists got killed every day, like I mean it's so like hard for me, because I need to be a journalist. I need to be telling a story, telling dreams, telling missing story, because we are not just number. And by the way, I work for that number project. Is a Palestinian project, and I really like from this point I start to becoming a journalist, and I really appreciating this time, because I got scholarship in UL, and I want to telling it's not just the end of the story, but I need to continue telling this story, and I need to be a good journalist.
Thank you, Hamza. Hadi, if I could bring you in also, can you talk about, so we had Luke and Lorcan there, who were the kind of classic the model of the Western journalists who come into conflict zones and go out of them. They're not part of the zones they're reporting on. They don't live there. Can you talk about trying to work, in an environment where these are your people, this is your family, this is your people, and you were a victim. You were a victim of this also. Can you talk to me about working as a journalist in that situation?
Yeah. So working as a journalist in Gaza, you are reporting the suffering of people, and often like you are like dealing with the same suffering that these people are going through. And I think like it is very hard to be a journalist in Gaza because like, it is something like stressful, it is something fearful. You're seeing journalists every day getting killed in Gaza. And like Western media is not like covering everything properly. And like even like when journalists are getting killed in Gaza, you're seeing like the highlight is saying, for example, saying like 10 Palestinian journalists got killed in Gaza during the last month in the Gaza-Israel conflict. They are not saying who killed them. They're not saying like the full truth. So yeah, this is what I see.
Okay, it's Heba, you might be able to come in on this. Just what type of methods are journalists using in Gaza to try and get the information out, given the lack of internet? Hamza, I know you mentioned that. The lack of internet, the physical difficulty of trying to get information out to the world. Can you talk to me about that? What methods?
Yeah, so mostly journalists during the last genocide, they depended on their cell phones, recording everything whenever they can, even sometimes there's a bomb that's very near, it's very dangerous, they just get their phones, they go there and they capture. And sometimes these journalists, it takes them days to just be able to go to a place that have internet to upload the video, and even like it's hard for them to charge their phones, to find a place that can handle uploading these videos. And in addition to that, journalists have mostly during this genocide, despite the wars before, they depended on social media more than channels. Yes, Al Jazeera has done a great job. They kept covering what's going on, but Al Jazeera alone wasn't able to cover everything that's happening, because at the same time there were tens of massacres happening in different places in the north and in the south and in middle Gaza, everywhere. So people started taking it like upon themselves to cover what's happening, maybe because they didn't want to feel like they are forgotten, that that the survivor is just a form of disappearance without doing anything. So many young Palestinians in Gaza have started recording using their phones and reporting what's happening around them and uploading them under these hard circumstances. And I believe that social media was one of the most helpful things for Gazans to report what's happening. Despite that, as a Gazan who was in Gaza, everything was reported, maybe uploaded. It wasn't enough, honestly. Like when you go around, like I remember I spent a month in Al-Shifa hospital and I wasn't interested in reporting back then, and that's something I really regret, because I saw thousands and thousands of stories that was never spoken about, it was never talked about. They just, dead bodies that have came and gone as numbers without anyone talking about them. And there are some stories that have stuck in my mind till now, because I still remember some of the names of the screams of the young kids that were the only survivors of these families, and no one talked about them. So journalists in Gaza and the people themselves have tried their best using what we have and what we had with the phones, electricity, and the internet issues, but it was all they can do, but it wasn't enough to cover what was happening for Gazans.
Thank you, Heba. If I could come to you, Hamza, again. So you're now out of Gaza, and you're seeing and hearing from your family directly about what's happening there. Just what's your perception of how the Western media, the media in Ireland here, the English language media, covers the situation in Gaza? What is your feeling on that?
It's really, really painful. And like someone, I'll give you an example, like someone sleeping and a thief comes to their home and is stealing all things, and the owner or this person saw the stealer and continue sleeping. So it's really painful, because all the Western media nowadays, they're not speaking out of a human, they're speaking out of political language. And this is really it's hard for us, because they don't tell the story behind lines. They don't tell the human story, like a child searching for food for 10 hours, searching for waters. Because I came from a place where it's like I spent 1 week just for one meal. Is Western media tell this? Is any source of news tell this? Like I wait for 5 hours to just get a little water, to live like any human being. So the point here, the Western media doesn't tell out of a human being. So they want to deliver a message to to Western people, to Europe people, that we just speak out of political language, not in a human way. So that's why I select, or I choose to be a journalist, because it gives me a hope, or it gives me a source of telling my story with a human sources. So it's really painful. And by the way, my thesis, it will be about this, how Western media represent Gaza. So I'll be focused on the Irish Times, New York Times, and Al Jazeera. I'll compare between them in my thesis.
Okay, and Rouwah, if I could bring you in there, and I know Rouwah and Kathryn, you're both saying we want to kind of focus on the Heba and Hadi and Hamza here, but Rouwah, I think the relative silence in the Western media when it comes to atrocities being committed elsewhere in the world, again, I alluded to it quickly in the presentation, it's pretty well documented. Can you talk a little bit more about this? So again, you're of Palestinian origin yourself, but you've been you haven't lived there for a number of years, but so you've had that perspective for a while, or the critical eye in terms of how the Western media covers the region. But could you talk a little bit more about just the silence of the Western media when it comes to atrocities in places like Palestine or other non-Western?
So thank you for that. That's a really interesting question. So yeah, I am Palestinian. I'm Palestinian in the diaspora. So I wasn't born in Palestine. I was born in Kuwait. and spent the vast majority of my life outside of Palestine, and I've only been to visit once quite a long time ago. So my experience as a Palestinian in the diaspora is quite different than Heba and Hadi and Hamza, of course. Even though we have family in Gaza, we are like, global publics watching what's happening to our homes, to our countries, to my family's home in Gaza. So speaking on Western silence, I always come to this whenever we talk about, and you've mentioned it more than once, in terms of like Western media's failure. And whenever I hear that term in terms of it failing in its silence, perhaps, I always think about the quote that Palestinian journalist Mariam Barghouti said in an interview in September 2024, when the interviewer asked her, what comment do you have about kind of Western media's failure? And she gave the most, I think, interesting response in that she said, when you say failure, you're making the assumption that they were even there to serve to begin with. This isn't failure, this is policy. These aren't isolated practices, this is a systemic policy. And it's not just about omission and silence, but it's also about justifying, legitimizing Western imperial interests and geopolitical ambitions in the global South. And so this has been going on for decades. And I think that, what happened now was a clear kind of indication of that collusion to Western imperial geopolitical ambitions, because, and many scholars have noted this, Western media and legacy media were more like stenographers for the United States and for Israel. And so one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Asal Rad, who works on how Western media has covered Gaza, she said, Israel says is not journalism, something that she keeps repeating when she corrects. They call her the headline fixer because she notes how the language is passive. And she tends to use, to show the selective outrage and the double standards, she shows the coverage between Ukraine and Palestine to show the stark hypocrisy and the contradiction in terms of coverage. So when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, you can clearly name the perpetrator. You can clearly use the active voice. But when it comes to Palestine, you can't do that. But it's not that you can't, you're not willing to, and you've made that intentional choice. So whereas Israeli government narratives are legitimized and spoken of as fact, Palestinian narratives and accounts are marginalized or omitted or scrutinized or delegitimized. Okay, so this is something that has been, legacy media has systemically failed the global South, and in particular in this case, in Gaza. And so this has been decades in the making, because one of the most significant aspects of the issue in Palestine is the narrative, or the war on narratives. And we clearly understand that Israel has, its priority is to maintain a hegemonic hold over the narrative. And they're not concerned about the genocide itself or the atrocities that they are committing, which is publicly available when we see the videos that their soldiers post on social media sites. They're not concerned about the actual genocide itself. They're concerned about the media optics surrounding it. They're concerned about containing the narrative and maintaining it in their favor to continue legitimizing their atrocities. And so legacy media obviously pushed forth the atrocity propaganda that they used to justify. However, Palestinians have been experiencing a genocide since well before 2023. And as many scholars such as Julie Petit wrote, they are struggling to maintain a hold on the narrative and to shift people's attention away from the fact that this is a settler colonial context into creating this kind of narrative that this is Western civilization against barbarity, depicting Palestinians as kind of faceless terrorists who are just inherently violent. And of course, Palestinians during the Gaza genocide used social media platforms, even though those platforms were actively suppressing their voices. They tried to use those platforms to show people that we are human beings, just like you. And people began to see their humanity. And that's why polls are shifting in terms of favor. And this is what terrifies them more than anything else. So.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Rouwah, and that important kind of context around it. It is really important that the history of this coverage and the history of what's been perpetrated to in Palestine. It's not a recent thing. Kathryn, if I could come to you, just in terms of the practicalities that Hamza and Heba and Hadi have talked about in terms of trying to cover a story like this. You've done a lot of work just examining the impact of precarious work, essentially, on journalism. So trying to do journalism as a student journalist with no resources, with very poor pay. Can you talk about this just lack of security and protection, how it affects journalists trying to do work in places like Palestine? Yeah, sorry, Kathryn.
No, okay. Thanks, Fergal. Yeah, I suppose, so my research area looks at working conditions in journalism, and now I'm starting to look at, the precarious nature of work. We heard earlier from the two speakers, it was fascinating, but I suppose there's a couple of things really. We see a lot of independent journalists working in conflict areas without the backing of larger news organisations. So I suppose there's two conversations here, and I'm really obviously interested in your research and what's happening in how it's being covered or not. But I suppose what I'm interested in is the working conditions, and I suppose the how constrained journalists are that are working in these regions if they don't have backing of large news organisations. So if you're an independent journalist trying to tell the stories, trying to put faces to the genocide that's happening, who's paying for the training, who's offering insurance, how are they getting into these countries? We heard from Lorcan trying to get into Myanmar was very, very difficult. So I suppose there's big questions that need to be asked. How, I know Al Jazeera is very committed to training and offering training for its journalists, but if you're an independent journalist, we had Caitlin Kelly speaking here a couple of weeks ago for our final year students, and she does an awful lot of work around what's happening in Sudan. And, she's talking about that she's not doing it for the money. She's self-financing. She's working with a lot of NGOs to try and help finance the journalism work, the amazing journalism work that she's doing. So I suppose it's very difficult for journalists getting into these regions now, but also there's big questions that need to be asked around what we're doing to obviously physically protect these journalists, but also to ensure that they are able to tell these very important stories. We also heard from Luke that so many bureaus have closed. It's local journalists, people then that have to deal with writing stories about their own families, and how can we support journalists who are working and trying to bring these stories. Yeah, sorry.
Super. Thank you. Look, we have a very hard finish of quarter today, so I just wanted to put it to the floor. If anyone is there anyone who would like to ask a question before we continue? Just it would be nice to. Any questions? Any questions anyone would like to ask of the panel? Yourself, I don't know whether I've got a roving mic. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for. Can you hear me? Yeah. For really interesting discussion points. I suppose my question was around the media silence being so deafening, and how we have failed Palestinians, but also how that spreads much wider than just Palestine. How it fails society in general. We can see that we're being lied to, and that it builds up this huge stress levels right across, I think, our society. Because when we know that we're being lied to, then we start wondering what else are they lying about? Who else are they lying about? So it changes everybody's, I suppose, perspective. And I suppose my question maybe was to the panel: how do you take care of yourself? How do you kind of step aside from that and, I suppose, replenish your own resources?
Okay. Would one
So, since I've been living in Gaza since I was a kid, so I've always saw it, how we have been propaganded to the outside world and to the Western media that we are the aggressive, that we have deserved everything that has been happening to Palestinians. But with the last genocide, I think that the world has opened an eye to what has been really happening, and maybe that's all because Palestinians have made it possible for the world to see the narrative as much as they can, especially as Dr. Rouwah said, that social media wasn't helping so much, as they were always deleting most of the videos, most of the content, and many Gazans had to re-upload it again and again. And I can still see till now that the Western media is not covering everything correctly, because I saw stories personally that was covered with wrong details and wasn't taken care of. And the thing that media doesn't know is that every story is a family story. It's a human. It's a life for a person. So when you say this happened for this person and it's wrong, it's frustrating for us because we went through it, and for the person who has got killed, and for his or her family that would watch that the world just wrote their son's life just as another headline that wasn't even taken care, that wasn't taken carefully with correct information and data. So when the starvation was happening, I took it as a responsibility to talk about what's happening, because I saw people, I used to walk around the street and see people that they were so tired, they could barely talk. So I wrote an article, and I wrote with names and details, and I made it very detailed to tell the Western media especially, and I published it with Dropsite to show the world what's really happening in Gaza. And I still recall that on X, some of an Israeli supporter, someone a little bit famous, let's say, published that articles, and they had the audacity to say that I was lying, and it got a little bit viral on X with the Israeli supporting media, and I got called a liar and so on and so on, and that made me hold back a little bit. I said to myself that I'm gonna lay low. I won't write till I feel safe again, because I wasn't actually afraid for myself as much as I was afraid for my family, because if my decisions and my words will put me in danger, that's fine on me, but I won't handle that. It will put my family in danger. So I was I quit for a period of time until I got tired, and I had that, I was able to write again and publish again. So
if I could just bring thanks Heba. If I could bring that over to Hamza as well, just that question, that very good question from the floor about keeping faith. It's something that I try to impress upon people, that you have journalism and what journalism tries to do, and then you have the broader media ecosystem that journalism has to try and survive within. The political and all the pressures that are brought to bear, advertising, yada yada, in terms of the broader media is not necessarily journalism. And I wanted to, Hamza, how do you keep faith in your desire to be a journalist and kind of seeing this broader media coverage, or the overall media that isn't doing its job? But do you keep faith in you as a journalist being able to cut through that?
Yeah, so as long as I'm telling a true story and I'm telling my people's story, I'm keeping faith that, and even the people where I live right now, I got so support, and I really appreciate this. And those people really believe, telling me that I should believe in myself. And from this point, I becoming like believing that one day I'll become a journalist, one day I'll tell my people's story, tell my family story, even my own story. Because, I mean, telling those story is very important to the people that believe in, I mean, political story, or they don't like put attention to the human story. So that's make me like, give me a strength to speak, make me like telling the story that no one can see it. So the main thing that make me believe in myself to be a journalist, like I mean, because it's give me a healing inside to just write down and speaking those story. So, I mean, everyone knows Hindu story, right? So it's my friend cousins, and and she was, I mean, with her family in the car, and her family got closer to the Israeli tanks, and the Israeli tanks opened fire at her family, and she started to appeal. She started to ask for help, and she said, "Please come help me, please. My family have been killed. My father, my mother, my sisters." And as she started to appeal, like to ask for help, the Israeli opened fire at her and got killed. Even when the ambulance got in their way, they bombed the ambulance also. So and in that back this time, all the Western news, or most of the Western news, say they killed him by accidents. So I mean this that make me believe that I need to tell this story, tell the world that what's really behind under the line. Like, this is my point.
Okay, thank you. I would like to go to just briefly, but before we go to wrap up, Kathryn, if you could just briefly, beyond political statements, or what practical action can the Irish government or Irish media unions take to protect our journalistic colleagues in Palestine? Is there anything you can say on that? Is there?
Yeah, well, I suppose governments need to try and get more journalists into Gaza. Obviously, the Israelis have blocked the number of journalists that can go in there. I think as well, I mean, clearly today is very much about the Western coverage, but and the lack thereof, but equally the lack of accountability, the number of journalists that are being killed and nobody is being prosecuted. So I think governments really need to come together on that, and we need to see, I mean, if we're going to encourage we need to see justice for these journalists, but equally, if we want to incentivize other journalists to go and tell these very important and crucial stories, these lives matter. The stories of the people's lives they're telling matter, but I suppose that needs to happen. And then I know even what unions can do. The NUIG have had many protests. They've written to governments, lobbying for embargoes. I mean, money is what makes the world go round. I mean, embargoes. There could be a lot more done, I think, at that level.
Okay, look, I'm conscious of time. Just one final question, and I'd like to just to come in briefly on it. Just and any of you can answer this, Heba, Hadi, or Hamza. But just, do you feel any optimism at the moment about the future of Gaza, of Palestine, and being able to return home and being able to do journalism at home again?
Okay, so to be honest, in order to answer this question, we have to acknowledge the fact and the reality of what's going on in Gaza, and the situation is uncertain. It's miserable, and people there, they lack all the access of basic life needs. But Palestinians have always shown resilience, and they have always shown their love to their land, and that I'm optimistic about the world finally seeing the truth and giving Palestinians their lives back, helping them to get their lives back, to get their rights and everything they used to own and they deserve to own. I have to be optimistic about the future of Palestine while maintaining our narrative and our story and keep telling the stories that we have been through. But I really would like to be able to go live back in Gaza and in the beautiful Gaza that I used to live in and I grew up in, because we all know how the situation is there right now.
Thank you. Heba, would you like to come in just for a final word as well?
Yeah. So for me, I would like to be optimistic about this, but we need to be realistic. So even there's a ceasefire that started since 7 months, but nothing have changed. Palestinians are not able to go back to Gaza, and Palestinians are not able even to get out of Gaza. So in order for us to be able to go back to Gaza and to practice journalism there and to tell stories of people, this Israeli government have to be changed, and the whole world have to do something about it in order for us to go back and tell the stories again.
Okay. Look, I'm going to have to wrap it up there. And again, apologies in that this has had to be quite a quick event. We would love to have more time and more time for questions. I just wanted to say very quickly thanks to Yvonne and Christine and Dennis and all the staff at the Research Week for their help in putting this together. I wanted to thank Rouwah and Kathryn and Lorcan and Luke for their contribution today. And a special thanks to Heba and Hadi and Hamza for your work in Palestine and for coming and telling your story here today. We here in the journalism department express our solidarity and respect to our colleagues in Palestine, in Iran, in Lebanon, and all places of conflict as they try to do their work. So I just wanted to finish on that note. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming and supporting today.